All right, sweet. So, another episode of the Growth by Shawn podcast, and I am sitting here with Dennis Morolda today. Dennis, thank you for having on, brother.
What's up, Shawn? How's it going, my man? Thanks
All
for
right,
having me.
everything's good. Everything is good. When I have a mutual connection of people like David Waldy and Brian Panuzzo, I know that I'm putting myself in the right room with the right people. That's
Absolutely.
how I look at it. So,
Good dudes. Great dudes.
yeah. So you're Jersey guy in terms of born and raised there, and you founded Building Men in 2005, I think it was.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And and,
So
and like founded it was the first building men meeting was in 2005 when I was an assistant principal right in Bordentown where I live. So it didn't become a business until much later on, but
yeah,
the first meeting was in 2005. You're right.
gotcha. So when it first actually became more of the business itself, what was that transition like going from coach, school teacher, principal to owning and running CEO of a business?
Yeah, it was really scary, I'll be honest with you. So I left public education in 2019, and thinking back to that time frame, it was I needed a little bit of a change. I'd been in education starting my third day teaching was 9/11, September 11th, 2001, and quickly got into administration. My first administrative job we just talked about was 2005. So I spent a lot of time as a principal, almost 15 years. And I got to a point where I wasn't getting up like jacked up to go into work every single day. I had worked in a middle school for most of my career, and I took a job in an elementary school for the last 2 years. And it wasn't like filling my cup, I would say. And I worked in a school district where it was more about the test scores and going in and making sure that the lesson plans were on point and looking at curriculum. And it just wasn't me anymore. And so I decided to take a little bit of a pause, and I thought, all right, I potentially could go back to education one day. I wanted to do a little consulting work and see what else was out there. And so that was 2019 into 2020. And I started to travel around a little bit. I did workshops with educators, a couple keynote type speeches at conventions and conferences. It was all right. It was, interesting. It was something a little bit different. And then 2020 shuts down schools, right? It was March of 2020, all schools shut down. And I was doing more entrepreneurial type work at that time. And when it shut down schools, I went from making as a principal, a good 6-figure salary. And then it turned into making nothing. And I was basically without any income for 4 or 5 months. And at the same time, and we could get into personal life too if you want. I was in the middle of a divorce, and there was a time with 3 kids. My oldest is 18. My daughter just turned 16 this week, and I have a daughter who's 13. I was pretty much homeless for a period of time. I was living on my brother's couch. I moved in with my parents for a little bit. It was like a wild time for me. So when I think about starting the business, it wasn't it wasn't just, running through daisy fields, jumping on unicorns like, oh, this is the greatest. It was a lot of, challenging times, a lot of, ramen noodles and water for dinner for me and the kids for a period of time. And so it was scary. Looking back, I would not change anything. It taught me so much about life. It taught me so much about who I am, about resiliency. I learned so much more during that time than I knew existed in myself. So I look back at it when I turned it into a business. It was, like a 20-year overnight success for building men.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know all of the different ins and outs of that personal life story as well. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to hear, but it shows me just more of the proof of the characteristics and the traits that you embody and you're teaching the young men as well. So I think that's like just a good transition point to go into like the values that you have for building men itself, because I'm sure that a lot of them were built off of this specific time in your life. So I'm just going to read them off.
Yeah.
And we have accountability, authenticity, commitment, confidence, courage, curiosity, humility, integrity, leadership, resilience, respect, and self discipline. What I think is the most interesting is which come most naturally to you and which have been the most difficult to uphold for you.
Great question. as I it's like picking, your favorite kid or your, you know, um so which ones come most natural to me? I would say resilience, curiosity, commitment. Those would be the three off the top of my head. Respect, I think the way that I was raised growing up, and we could get into my whole situation with my father, but I learned at a young age, like I definitely have a level of respect for my elders. For any person I come into contact with, I try to convey that level of respect. And humility, I would say. The things that I struggled with the most were self-discipline. When I went through that time, Shawn, I was, once COVID shut schools down, I was a disaster. Dude, I was drinking every single day. I put on like 40 pounds. I was doing all of the unhealthy things that I teach the boys not to do right now. I
Yep.
mean, I lived that lifestyle. So that was a struggle for me, self-discipline. Confidence was a struggle for me. Uh, it was one of those imposter syndromes that I had. Like, why would anyone want me to come into their schools and work with their kids? Why would anyone hire me to do a keynote speech? Why would I? So I was that little devil on my shoulder that I talk about frequently. That was there, and it was a real thing for me. So those would be the things that I think were more natural for me, and the others were ones that I really struggled to have to be intentional about developing those characteristics.
Yeah. So, which is there like a time period of your life in terms of when you were growing up, when you were at school, when you were going through all of your detriments? Were all of these characteristics, did they just show up throughout your life, or was there this like moment where this this is like accountability, like this is what this season of life is teaching me,
Right.
this is when integrity is showing up for me? Is it specific moments for each? Is it just a lifelong process of how you came to these specific values?
Another good question, and I think when I look back, leadership is one that I feel like I was born with that. I've always gravitated toward leadership positions, whether it was on a sports team, running for student office when I was in school. Even when I started as a teacher, I went back right away to get my master's degree in education to become a school leader. So I felt like that was just part of who I was. Some of the things, it's like the movie Slumdog Millionaire. The kid's up there and he's being asked the questions about, the actual game show, and they, at the end, they're like, how did you know all these things? And for him, he went through an experience, and that experience taught him something. And I'm such a fan of thinking about cognitive dissonance. We go through experiences that information inputs enter our brain, and I love when things, rattle me around a little bit and I have to reconsider my viewpoint on things. And I think that that's where learning really happens. So for me, I'll give you an example. As far as resilience is concerned, I remember a spot in my life when it was during that COVID time frame. I want to say it was end of May, beginning of June of 2020. And it was right around the time that I decided to lean into building men in a deeper level. And I'm in the middle of a divorce, barely, I had no income, and I went for a drive. And I was driving this old beat up Honda Accord that I absolutely hated. I mean, this car was like the bane of my existence. And I just took a ride and there's no one on the road. It was like ghost town. It looked like Walking Dead. Like, and I pulled off to the side of the road in this, it was like a solar farm. And I just went for a walk, and I have AirPods in and I'm listening to music, and I'm crying my eyes out. I'm like, what happened here? What's going on? I left being a principal and now I have no money whatsoever. What I'm going to do with my kids? I was really at that level. It was like George Bailey on the bridge and It's a Wonderful Life. I was really thinking, like, could potentially my kids be better off without me? Like, I had those thoughts, those dark thoughts. There's $1 million life insurance policy. Is there a way that I could like fake it? Like, it was a fleeting moment, but I really thought those things. And then, Shawn, there was a song that came on that hit me in a different way, and it's a song that I listened to probably 1,000 times growing up. There's a lot of issues with my father, but one thing that we always connected on was music, and he was a blue collar worker, and I would go to work with him. I was actually talking with Julie this morning about it, and I was saying I remember my father waking me up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to go paint with him. He owned a painting business, and he would paint apartments, and we would bust our ass, working in it. I just always dreaded it. So we would listen to Howard Stern at 6 o'clock. until he was done. And then he would put on classic rock and we listened to classic rock together and talk about the songs a little bit, which I then took and did that with my own kids. But, we would have conversations about music. And there was a song that I'd probably heard 1,000 times. Like I mentioned, it was a song Already Gone by the Eagles. And I wasn't a huge Eagles fan. There's some, they have some good music or whatever. But there was a line in the song Already Gone that says, so oftentimes it happens that we live our lives in chains and we never even know we have the key. And that line in the song, at that moment in my life when I really needed to hear something, that hit me in a different way. And I listened to that song, Shawn, over and over and over and over again on repeat. And I just kept having this image of myself being like chained by these self-imposed barriers that I was putting in my own way. And I started to realize, if I want to make a difference in this world, it's up to me. Like I can't play the victim anymore. I can't say, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. We talk all the time and lifted about shoulding all over yourself or stepping in should. And I decided in that moment, the change that exists that are binding me are 100% my responsibility and my privilege to undo those chains and then start like really stepping into who I was meant to be in this world. So that's a little bit of a story around the idea of resiliency and how, as I built these pillars for building men, there were little lessons like that along the way. And when I meet with boys in person, I tell those stories. Like I'll share those stories with kids because they need to see men having conversations and recognizing that we do go through tough times. But what do we do to come out of those tough times better on the other side and better for people that love us on the other side? Too many times, I think, as fathers, like we tell the stories to our kids about the time we hit the game-winning shot, or the girl that we took to the prom, or when things came up roses, and kids are like, well, I'm really struggling, and did my dad ever go through something similar? So I try to normalize those struggles for boys. And with the idea of resiliency, that's one way to really highlight the importance of having that, like, stick to itiveness. I'm not going to let whatever's in front of me hold me down anymore.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, it's really a really powerful story. When I look at that story itself, listening to the Eagles song over and over in that solar field, what was the first step from there? You made the decision, but then what?
It's interesting that the podcast, the first episode on that I did on the Building Men podcast, was called the decision, quote unquote, and it was ready, fire, aim for me when I started. So for me, what I decided to do in that moment, there was a guy that I had reached out to. I was listening to his podcast. His name is Stephen Mathis. I'll give him a shout out here. His podcast was like the holistic alpha male optimization podcast. And again, this isn't a time in my life that I was really, really struggling across the board. And Stephen Mathis, he's like a total psychopath. Love the guy, but he's like, he does everything balls to the wall. And so I would listen to his podcast, and I liked it because he was super authentic and he talked about his own life experiences and things like that. And I had reached out to him on my birthday in 2019. And I was like, dude, I'm really struggling across the board. I was like struggling with my mental health. I was, again, my physical health, even my sexual health. I mean, I could go in that direction. Like I was like a total disaster across the board. And he reaches out to me during COVID, and he's like, listen, I'm doing this group for guys. Pay whatever you want. If you want to pay $5, pay $5. If you think it's worth $500, pay $500. And again, I'm really struggling financially at the time. I was like, I can give you $50 a month for this program. He's like, dude, jump in on it. So what he did was he would put challenges out there for us every single week. And there was like an online group, and we had to post about what we were doing. And so we put up a video about getting enough sleep, and then hydration, and then movement. And then he was like having us do like Kegel exercises for our sexual health. He was like a million different things. And I decided, I was like, what else have I got going on right now? I'm going to lean into this. So it started for me with getting 8 hours of sleep every night, drinking. It was like 150 ounces of water a day, a little bit more than a gallon of water a day, rather than drinking beer and drinking, sugary sodas and things like that. And then it was gyms weren't open, so body weight exercises. So I just decided every single day, no matter what, I was going to do 150 push-ups and 150 squats. And that turned into like, I incrementally increased that to, there were some days that I was doing like 1,000 push-ups in a day. And then it turned into running and doing wind sprints. And I set a goal for myself that I was going to do a Murph. by
Oh,
the end of
okay.
the summer. And so
Yep.
all of a sudden, like I'm doing these daily things, and I start to recognize the importance of journaling and meditating and self-discipline. And it turned into, I went from, in June of 2020 to September of 2020, I went from 255 pounds to 215 pounds. And so I'm a big dude. I'm 6'4",
Mhm.
right? And so 6'4", 255 on a linebacker looks good. On me, it did not. So I got down to 215 pounds, and I did a Murph.
Mhm.
And so, a mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, and another mile run. And I did it in like 47 minutes. And I said, I'm going to do that next one, and I'm going to beat my time. And then every month I just started doing these Murphs, and it just turned into, it became who I was. So
Mhm.
for me, the thing that changed it was listening to that song. And what was one thing that I can do? I can control how I start my day. The things that I'm doing on a regular basis, especially during COVID when there wasn't work going on for me, I decided to lean into taking care of my mental health and my physical health. And then the rest just started to happen. But it wasn't easy, dude. It was a lot of hard work for me. But I look back, and that was a huge turning point in my life.
Yeah. Momentum is one of the most undervalued, underutilized aspects of life in terms of how to continue progressing. Just for myself and what it sounds like from that story here. Um, when I look at I want to go back to these values since we started with this though.
Yeah.
What is the most difficult ones that you found for the younger men to really value and embody?
Well, starting with the first two, accountability and authenticity for younger men.
Mhm.
There's this idea of like victimhood, like it's everyone else's fault for things that are going on. And then there's a lot of gaslighting with kids too. And I call them out on it all the time. When you see them do something, like, I didn't do that. It wasn't me. It was someone. And so that's really tough for kids, is just owning it. And so the first, I'm working with several school districts right now. And the first meeting that I have now with the boys, I give them the backstory of what Building Men is, where it came from. And then I talk to them about accountability. And a challenge that I put forth for them is to take like radical responsibility for something in your life that you have done that you've never taken ownership over. I was like, I don't care if it's you got away with coming home late, or you told your parents you were sleeping at someone else's house, or you cheated on an assignment when you were in second grade, whatever it is, like own something, take accountability for something, and you recognize you'll start to feel a lot lighter when you do that. It's a game changer. And so I put out the challenge to the boys in the first meeting. That's the first thing that I do. And then the second thing I do is talk to them about intentional discomfort.
Mm,
And I was like, life has become too easy for us. Comfort will
mhm.
kill us, and our environment will eat our intentions for breakfast. So, what can you do to set up an intentionally uncomfortable situation for yourself? So, I challenge the boys before they get out of the shower every day to turn it on as cold as they can take it for a minute. And they look at me like I'm nuts. Like, why would we do that? I'm like,
Yep.
because it sucks.
Mm,
And you do something that sucks and you do it intentionally, there's a ton of health benefits and mental and physiological benefits that come along with cold showers. But I said, you step out of the shower, you get this rush of energy, and you just did something that you knew was going to suck. You didn't
mhm,
die from it. And the next thing that comes along, you're ready to go.
mhm.
So that's a big piece, is those little challenges I put out, accountability being the first. And then the second, like again, in alphabetical order, authenticity. It's so hard for kids to truly be themselves. They think they, like, the way that they view themselves as this looking glass self. It's like, I see myself the way I think you see me, not even how you see me.
Mhm.
It's how I think. So your
Yeah.
perception of their perception of how they think their peers see them. So for an example, in the first Building Men meeting, I introduced myself and I asked the boys, tell us your name. Like, I just want to make sure I can memorize their names, and then tell us something about yourself. And every single kid, I'm Jamal, I like basketball. I'm Brian, I like football. I'm Bill, I like baseball. Nothing deeper. So this week I'll be in some schools and we'll be talking about authenticity. And I'm like, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share something, like a story about myself that I didn't tell them. That's a little bit, takes a little bit of vulnerability to share it. And I'm
Mhm,
going to ask them to go a layer deeper. I don't care what your favorite color is. I mean, that's
mhm,
great. You like magenta, but like, tell us something about yourself that it seems a little scary to share, but
mhm.
what's said here stays here. And so I'll lean on them a little bit to share, a story with some authenticity. So those two things right off the bat, I think, are really, really challenging for kids. And then it's also balancing confidence and humility. And
Mm,
I put those two things in there intentionally because, you know, you want kids to like have that level of self-confidence, but you don't want it to get to the cocky range. So I always I talk about those two things simultaneously. We talk about confidence and humility at the same time. You know, to be, you know, have that quiet confidence and not be a dick, but then
yeah.
also, you know, understand like uh, if I'm having a conversation with you, like I'm going to give everything I can to that conversation.
Hmm.
Like I want to understand, like I was able to go on some people's podcasts and people believed in me, and you know, and so I want to be able to provide, you know, that in return, like a pay it forward idea as well.
Hmm. Now, there's a great quote. I'm not sure who it's from. I know that you're big on quotes too. I almost started the podcast with a Tony Robbins quote to really get you going. But there's a quote that we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. And it's the same reflection when it's coming in. Someone doesn't see me as I see me. They see they only see me as they see me. Either way, we understand what I'm saying
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah. I got you.
But yeah, so when you're looking like when you're building this vulnerability, when you're building this authenticity with these young men, when you're in there's such an age gap between each of you.
Yeah.
How is it that you're able to connect with them? Is it starting with you and building that vulnerability and just showing them that it's okay to share for you? Or are there other areas that you're looking to do to really build that connection with them?
I definitely start with sharing about myself, my own story. I like to break it down to where they see me as a guy who has overcome, right? And so what I hope they can do is in some small way put themselves in my shoes as I was going through challenging situations as I was growing up. Um, you know, I also believe wholeheartedly, like children need to be known, kids need to be known. So I will talk to them. I like I get to know them on a deeper level. I really care about who they are. There's an exercise that I have teachers go through if I'm doing a workshop with teachers, and I say, okay, pick out one of the classes that you teach, your period 6 social studies class. Write down every kid in the class. Like right now, just write down every kid in your class. Picture that class. Write down something that you know about every kid in that class, besides just like they have black hair. Like
Mm,
write down something that you know about them, and then write down next to them, do they know that you know that about them? And so
mhm.
teachers, you don't have to tell me the answer to those questions, you
Yeah.
know, as I put you through that. It's more of a challenge for you. Are you spending time going a layer deeper and getting to the kids? Because like they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Like that's like a, you know, Maya
Mhm.
Angelou quote. And I also believe knowing the kids is more important than knowing the content. So when I go in there, I lean into, I want to know about them, what they're doing. We start and end every single meeting with a handshake too. So during those times when I'm shaking hands with all the boys, I'm like, tell me something that you did last week that excited you,
Mm,
or what are you looking forward to in the next month of your life, or what was your favorite song, book,
mhm,
whatever it is. And so I have a good memory, so I'm able to, you
mhm,
know, put those little things in my memory bank, and then I'll draw upon that the next time that we talk. Then I learn about what the things that they're interested in as well. So I have a son who's 18 years old. Again, mentioned daughters that are 16 and 13. I'll
mhm,
ask them like, all right, what are the kids listening to right now? Like, tell me about the music. Tell me about what's popular on YouTube. Tell me about, you know, who's the you know, the thing on TikTok. So if I pull out something like that, they look at me like, huh, he's done his homework as well. He cares about the things that we're interested in. But I also am like, a lot of that stuff's bullshit. You know, I'm also, so they know that I'm in it because I care about them and what they're interested in, but I still believe in those character pillars. Like we come back to those things all the time as well.
is the music right now driving you crazy?
Oh, the
Like,
auto tune stuff, like it's um so I think it's a system of a down. What's the it's the song is Chop Suey, System of a
mhm,
Down. It's like an well, there's a rap guy, his name is Lil Uzi Vert, and he
okay.
redid System of a Down. And so my son sent it to me because he listens to that music. I'm like, all right, I'll listen to it right now. But then I could talk about Lil Uzi Vert when I'm in a group of, you know, eighth grade boys that are up in, you know,
Yeah.
North Jersey somewhere, and they get a kick out of that stuff as well. So It does. It's not, but I don't know, generationally, like my father said the same thing about like 90s alternative and grunge. So I'm listening to like, you know, Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots, and he's like, well, they're nowhere near as good as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin. And I'm sure his father said the same thing about, Elvis Presley and whoever
Mm,
else. So I think that's generationally. I try to pick out little things and I'm like, okay, I could stand this a little bit here.
yeah.
But yeah, that's good stuff. It's
Yeah.
funny.
I'd love to go down further into the fatherhood and music, not rabbit hole, but what has helped shape you. But I'll stick with the boys for one more
Yeah.
little section here. Is there so there's the vulnerability aspect and the just really learning about them from your side, but what about from their side? What kind of resistance do some of these kids have when they're first going and hearing you speak, meeting you, talking with you?
Well, it starts off with they walk in, and a lot of the schools I'm in are inner city type schools.
Mhm,
And so I'm this big white dude who's sitting in front of the room. I don't look like them. And so immediately they don't trust me.
mhm,
So I'm walking in there recognizing that this may or may not be a group of kids that is there voluntarily. They might have been just like tapped on the shoulder, like you need to go and do this. This is an important thing. Some of them volunteer, but some of them are just, the counselors or the administration puts them in there. So immediately there's a lack of trust.
mhm,
And they're thinking, who is this guy and why am I sitting here? So I have about an hour to build rapport with them, to have them understand that this is an important thing. And I tell them, if you come to these meetings every single month for the whole school year and you're open to, the things that we're talking about, you share things that are going on in your life and you put into play these habits that we'll be talking about as well, your life will be totally different in a year and then for the rest of your life.
mhm,
And so when I put that out there and I said, if you don't want to do it, it's fine. Like I give homework challenges every week. If you don't want to do it, I'm not like grading you or anything like
mhm,
that. Do it and it will make your life better. And I know that because I did the opposite for a long time and it sucked. And
mhm,
so I can talk from experience. The other cool thing is some of the school districts that I'm working with, they're sending in male guidance counselors, like the dean of students, a couple male teachers that will sit alongside me. So I'm telling a story, and then I have two other dudes who are also sharing things that are going on in their life, and they're seeing men have conversations, share some vulnerable things, but also talk about what did I do to overcome this, and then
mhm,
how does it like jive with my definition of what it means to be a man. And so they're like their eyes pop open, and by the end of the first meeting the feedback is they all want to come back and they want to know if they can bring a friend.
mm,
And I mean, that to me, that's a huge thing. And I just, so after I do a building men meeting in a school,
mhm,
I usually do a full day, and
mhm,
I tell them I'm there for whatever, 8 or 9 hours, whatever, however you want to utilize me. If you want me to do 10 meetings, a half hour each, if you want me to do 5 meetings, an hour each, whatever works the best for you, I am there to support. And then what I'll do is afterwards, over the course of the next week or two, I'll have a follow up meeting with their stakeholders, the
mhm,
counselors, the administration, a couple teachers, debriefing about what went on, and then let's plan for the next meeting. Let's talk about what we will talk about the next time. This way they know that they can support it on their end as well.
mhm,
And the feedback is the kids loved it and they want to
mhm,
know, can you come back more than once a month?
mhm,
And so to me, that's how, it's to break down that barrier, the gap that exists initially is to I share some vulnerabilities,
mhm,
but I also at the same time, like I command the space. Like I
mhm,
walk in and like we talk about, this is when I'm talking, this is
mhm,
what it sounds like. If you're talking, I will give you the same level of respect. There'll be times that you're working in groups and we'll talk about what that sounds like. But we talk about those things. And I also tell them this, it's 100% voluntary.
mhm,
If you don't want to be here, like I'll miss you, but
mhm,
you're not doing me a favor by you're doing yourself a disservice by not being here. So I hope you
mhm,
you stay and join. But once they recognize that they have autonomy in the decision whether or not they want to be there, they decide to stay.
mhm. That's always been one of the more difficult aspects for me in terms of when I look to help others, in a sense, like be of service. Is it difficult for you when you say, "Hey, this is voluntary," perhaps a kid gets up or someone isn't as interested, that mentality of I want to be able to help everyone? Is that difficult to comprehend for you just in that setting?
Typically, if there's a kid that gets up and walks out, there's something going on that's way deeper than just that
Mhm.
surface level thing. I mean, I like to think of it as an iceberg when I think about kids, especially
Mm,
adolescent boys, right? So the iceberg, there's only a small portion of the iceberg that is above the waterline that you can actually see, right? And so I look at it as, with kids, those are things that I can use my senses to determine what's going on. I could see the kid, see what they're wearing, I could
mhm,
see how tall they are, things like that. I can hear the tone of voice that they're using. With middle school kids, shit, you could smell them half the time, right? And so if it's either body odor or the damn axe that they're spraying all over each other, but I can use my senses to make a determination. Things that are at the waterline when I think about kids as an iceberg are things that I need to do a little bit more research. I could look at their behavior reports. I could, talk to the teachers about the grades, look at cumulative files, standardized test scores. Not,
mhm,
again, not the be all end all by any means, but it's a metric that I can use to find out a little bit more information. But the child exists below the waterline. Those are their hopes, their fears, their dreams, their traumas, family situations, things that they're excited for, things that they're worried about. And the only way that I can figure that out is by getting to know them. So with a kid that just gets up and walks out of the room, now that's my job to go and follow up with that kid in some capacity. Hey man, I understand you didn't want to be there. Totally fine.
mhm.
Is there anything else I can do to support you?
Yeah.
No, I'm here. And then the next time I come back, if the kid's not there again, I'll follow up again. Hey, Shawn, I realize that you weren't at the meeting again today. I just want to let you know I'm here to support you in any way, shape, or form. And sometimes it takes the kids 2-3 months to be able to say, listen, my my dad got locked up, or I
Mhm,
saw my dad beat my mom, or whatever it is.
mhm.
But I don't give up on the kid. I'm not like,
Yeah,
he left, screw him,
yeah.
because I recognized that at the time the kid just didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with whatever we were discussing or needed to separate themselves from the situation.
Yeah. It's very impactful, and you have a very good way of presenting yourself and actually having a genuine care about, just like you had stated earlier, about who you're having the conversation with in that moment. When we look at the emotional capacity side, the what you had just stated, we can go back now to more when you were a child and your father's relationship and what that looked like between the two of you on each side,
Yeah, it
you know.
was when I was growing up, Shawn, I was, as a little boy, I wanted to be just like my dad. He was a tall, good-looking guy. He was in great shape. He worked his ass off. He made good money. So I saw that as like what a man should be, right?
Mhm,
And I talk all about it. Like, the false ideals of masculinity are physical dominance, sexual conquest, and accumulation of wealth. Like, that's what gets in our heads. Like, we need to be all of those things. And so that's how I saw my dad for a long period of time. But our relationship, he never really shared much about himself. And my relationship was more based around how well I did athletically. So I was a good athlete growing up. I played football, I played basketball, I played baseball. I was like the quarterback. I was a good athlete, so I was successful. And so he based a lot of his value identity on my performance. So the way
mm,
that he looked among the other coaches, if his son was, batting 700 and he would hit, 12 home runs a year, he felt like he was a better dad because of it. It had nothing. I mean, he helped me out. He threw me batting practice and hit me ground balls, but that's how he valued it. But those memories for me, I love playing on the team, but my memory of him was all like fear and sadness. Like, if I did well, I felt a level of connection with my father. But if I didn't, if I struck out 2 times and one time was with the bases loaded in the seventh inning, it was horrible for me. It was like verbal and mental and emotional abuse for the next like 2 or 3 days. And not just like, he would take me, if I made an error, he would take me to the field and he would hit ground balls to me for 2 hours. I was crying my eyes out. And he was just yelling and screaming at me about how bad I sucked in the game and I let the team down and I let him down. So I developed this idea of like being afraid of my father and being afraid to make a mistake. And so that became a part of my identity as I was growing up. Like, I really was afraid of those things. And so there was a situation when I was in sixth grade. One of the reasons, again, that I wanted to get into education eventually was there were these three boys that lived up the street from me that were they were my buddies at the time. We would play sports together. They were a couple of years older than me. So I'm in sixth grade, you know, I'm like 12 and they're like 14 or 15 years old. But again, I was an athlete. I could hang with the older kids.
Mhm.
So anyway, I made the middle school baseball team my sixth grade year, and I was so proud of myself. I couldn't wait to go home and tell my dad. It was like this identity of in a big middle school as a sixth grader making the team was a big deal. And so I'll never forget. There was a day in May at the end of my sixth grade year. This is after the boys. These boys, their names were actually Frankie, Louie, and Vinny. These like tough Italian kids that lived up the street. They didn't make the team. And when they didn't make the team, not knowing as eighth grade kids how to deal with the emotion of that upset and anger, they took it out on me and they started to make fun of me and I got beat up by these kids, jumped, and these were kids that I was hanging around with. So I was like scared to death of these kids in school. I would like adjust my journey throughout the school so I didn't see them or run into them. So I constantly in middle school, my heart was beating a mile a minute from the time I walked into the time I left the spring of my sixth grade year. And so when we didn't have baseball practice, I would have to book home so these kids did not jump me on the way home from school. It was a horrible experience. Well, anyway, there was one day in the end of my sixth grade year, my father takes me for batting practice and we drive past their house and the boys are standing outside playing basketball and they flip up the middle finger at us as we're driving by. And my father sees him. He goes, "What's up with those boys? I thought you were friends with them." And I'm like, "Forget it, Dad. Forget it. No big deal. Just drive." And so the whole time that he's throwing me batting practice, I'm thinking about, are they going to be there when we drive home? Is there another path that we can take to not drive past Frankie's house? There wasn't. So we drove past, and this time they all yell out, "Fuck you," as loud as they could as we're driving by. He looks at me with like this level of disgust in his eye, pulls into the drive when he goes, "Go inside and wait for me. I'll be right back." And now I'm scared shitless. Like, what the hell is going to happen here? My dad, who I'm afraid of, and these three boys who I'm scared to death of in school, they're going to go, and my dad's going to what? Confront them? Like, I had no idea as a 12-year-old kid. So I'm up in my room and I'm shaking, like not knowing what's about to come. And about 10 minutes later, my father walks in the door and he goes, "Let's go. I arranged for you to fight Frankie one-on-one." And I don't move. And he says it again, "Let's go. I arranged for you to fight Frankie one-on-one. Louie and Vinny won't jump in." And now I start to cry. And the whole, when you're confronted with stress, there's the fight, flight, and freeze response. I froze. I couldn't move. And now I'm crying my eyes out. And he looks at me with like this level of disgust. And he's like, "They were right. You are a pussy." And he walks out of my room. And a couple minutes later, my mom walks in, and I'm crying my eyes out. I could still remember like the tactile feeling of the carpet on my fingers as I was like rubbing my hands into the floor. And my mom goes, "You just lost your best friend, your father." And she walks out of my room. So now my whole world is like shifted. My father doesn't talk to me for like the next month. There's no like, "How's it going? How was school?" No hitting batting practice. He doesn't talk to me. And the only time he references me is to say, "Hey, Tara, Frankie and Vinny are up there. I bet you would have kicked his ass," to my younger sister, right? So now my whole thought process of myself, and again, one of the reasons Enlifted was such a powerful thing for me going through that coaching cert, was the little devil that sat on my shoulder for decades was, "You're not good enough. You're not strong enough. You won't stand up for yourself. You're not tough. You're not courageous. Other people will bully you your whole life," because that's what I felt from these kids and from my father.
Mhm.
So with my own experience with my father, it's been a really, really challenging experience. We don't talk anymore.
Mhm.
But there were times that he and I almost came to blows when I was in my 20s. Like, we had to be separated. It was like very traumatic thing for me to go through. And as I went through in my own like journey of self-discovery, I really needed to talk to that little kid, me as a 12-year-old, and say, "Listen, like, it's not your fault.
Mhm.
Like, you shouldn't have had to go through that. That was not okay. Like, that's a traumatic experience, an adverse childhood experience. You did not have the ability to emotionally sit with whatever was going on with your father, his past traumas, that it came out in that way." And I needed to talk to that little kid and be like, "Dude, it's okay. You can cry. It's, like, I'm here for you," kind of thing. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until I went through that experience that I was really able to close the door on those chapters in my life. But it took, dude, like 30 years for me to go through it. So
Yeah.
now I'm like, what can I do to help kids in that middle school and high school age range, knowing that there's a lot of shit that they're going through? Can I, in some small way, be the person that they need to talk to? Because I did not have that person myself. I didn't have anyone that I can go to that I can lean on, a teacher, a coach, a mentor. No one was there. And so I felt alone for decades in my
Mm,
life. So that's a little bit of an insight into, my own traumas with my father, and
yeah.
one of the reasons why I started Building Men in the first place. And when I started, I didn't think it was going to be anything like it's turned into. It was more just like, I'm a principal. I could set up a space for boys to come and talk about some real stuff.
Mm. Yeah, it's amazing just to be able to reflect back on that now, to listen to that. I was so just in the story while you were talking about it, just picturing it, able to visualize it so much in my own unique way. Carrying that for so long, I'm sure is difficult, heavy, but once you were able to finally change that perspective and take a look at it from the outside as you were older, what was that like when you were finally able to change that story or talk to that younger Dennis?
Yeah, it was. I still remember the moment that I was going through it. It was in a drive. I was in Washington State, going from like Seattle up to like way north Washington, almost on the Canadian border, and it was like a 4 hour drive. And I just said to Julie, I need some time to write. Like we had an experience and something came up, and it was like it triggered me, and I was like, why is this happening? I don't get it right now. And so I open up a journal, and dude, I wrote for 4 hours, and I filled up like 75 pages of this journal, just writing about that experience and subsequent experiences. And when I did the Enlifted talk, I talked about like the little boy in the story was me, right? And so I, as I was going through that, I needed to write all this stuff down. And the journal was like tear soaked. I'm like, we're driving and I'm just writing, and like tears are streaming down my face. And so for me, I needed to, we talk about it all the time. Like, and you can't like get over it or go around it or push it down and sweep it under the carpet. You have to go get into those things that exist that are getting us stuck. And the only way to get on the other side is to go through it. Because
Mhm,
if you constantly shove it to the side, which I did forever, it starts to show up in resistance, distraction, and victimhood, those three thieves that I talked about as well. And so for me, like, I was afraid of doing the hard stuff. For me, I was distracting myself with drinking, with like pornography, with comfort, and then it was everyone else's fault. Oh, it's my dad's fault. It's my ex-wife's fault. It's this person's fault. It's that person's fault. But I recognize, like, while those things, I wasn't responsible for those things. It's my
mhm,
responsibility now to deal with them.
mhm.
And then I talk about as well, I'm so happy that all those things happened to me now. Like, thank God that my father was like that.
Yeah,
Thank God that I married my father, eventually. Like that's the type of person that I married.
yeah,
Because if I didn't go through those things, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. And
mhm,
I wake up every single day recognizing I have the opportunity to, even if it's one kid, I'll be in
mhm,
a school in North Jersey on Wednesday next week. There's one kid in that school that, by listening to me and connecting with peers and sharing some stories, that kid's life might take a 5 degree different path,
yeah,
and that might be all that kid needs to change the trajectory of his whole life. So now I see it as like, what a privilege to have gone through those things right now, because now that story that I have doesn't have to define who I am. Now it could be something that I went through that can help me help other people in the future.
yeah. It's definitely not who you are, just a part of who you are. That's one of my favorite phrases to use. And everyone's story is so different, but it's exactly what you need. And
Yeah.
you don't realize that it's what you need until later, you know. Um, Dennis, can we just share with us where we can find you? I mean, I had a lot more prepared, but I'm happy with everything that we went down and what I was able to learn from you and take away from this moment. But before I get into the last question, can we just hear where we can find you or work with you and what you're doing right
Yeah,
now?
thanks, man. I appreciate it. Great conversation too. I appreciate the questions that you asked, going a little bit deeper, your curiosity about Building Men as well. So to find me, my website is buildingmen.io, and then through there, I mean, the Instagram is, I'm most active on Instagram. I used to post every single day. Now I'm just like, when I get something that inspires me, I post. It's building.men is my Instagram, and I have the Building Men podcast as well. So those are the three, the most readily available spaces that you can find out more information about what I'm doing.
Perfect. And then our last question. So we have our last guest left you a question.
Yeah.
So we have this is from Kelly Poole. She is a life coach. She's in Sedona, Arizona. What are you willing to do in the pursuit of your goals?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Kelly Poole, thank you for the opportunity to ask that question. And I like the format there too. Very
Mm,
different. What am I willing to do in pursuit of my goals? I do believe it's like having that purpose in our lives. Like we talked about victimhood and what is the hero that fights against victimhood, and I believe it's purpose and it's attachment to this larger thing in our lives. I think in my life, um, my purpose is to help young men who are struggling in some capacity, even kids that aren't struggling, that need just that mentor, that guy who's been through some difficult situations, that might be there to be more of a lighthouse to that person. So as far as like what I'm willing to do, this is it, this is what I am invested in for the rest of my life. I will do whatever it takes to continue this message, even if it's not me that's out there doing it. I just believe the work needs to be done. So if it's guiding people as a mentor, speaking on stages, writing a book, continuing with the podcast, having conversations, every single conversation that I have, it's an opportunity for me to pour into another person. And while I'm pouring into another person, they might find some spark of motivation or inspiration to then pour into another person.
mhm,
So as far as it's this is it. This is my life's passion, my life's mission. So I'm willing to do whatever that takes to help the next generation of young men coming up.
mhm. Yeah, the ripple effect is never seen, but it's something that's more powerful than we can realize.
Yep.
Many people want to say, I want to impact just one person. But even if you just impact one person, that can spread 10, 10 layers deeper,
Yep.
you
And
know?
you might not even know like someone that you're
Yeah.
talking to. It might hit them like sometime later.
Hmm.
Like I went yesterday morning. I go to the gym in the morning. Typically, my mornings, as a quick like total aside, my
Hmm.
mornings are like I get up, I journal, and then I walk. And I like to watch the sunrise as I walk. It's just like my time. It's like a half hour, 40 minutes in the morning, and then I'll go to the gym afterwards. Yesterday, my schedule was a little bit off, so I went to the gym first. My stretching routine was not like it should be, and I was doing Romanian deadlifts, RDLs with heavier weight than I was normally doing. And I wrenched my back. And it was one of those things. I went to go pick it up and I felt it in my back. And I'm going to be 47 years old. So I dropped it. It was 100-pound dumbbells. I dropped them and I was like so pissed off at myself. I'm like, better. You need to stretch, those kinds of things. And so I leave the gym and I'm in a bad space mentally. I'm just like, I
Yep.
was in such a good groove lifting
Hmm.
and this and that. And so I decide to go to Wawa. I'm just going to go grab a bag of ice and a cup of
Hmm.
coffee at Wawa. So I get into Wawa and I see this kid. His name is Blaine. And Blaine was in my original Building Men program in 2005. I see him in the gym or at Wawa, and I would never be in there other than because I hurt
Hmm.
my back, right? So I'm in Wawa, and he goes, Mr. Morolda, he goes, I am so happy I ran into you. He goes, I'm watching the Phillies play last night against the Braves, and he's like, and I had like this memory of you sitting with me when I was in seventh grade. And this is a kid who really struggled with his mental health. He was suicidal. He lost his dad when he was in middle school. And so I would eat lunch with this kid once a week and we would just talk about sports. And the kid's a huge Philly fan. And he's like, I'm watching a game last night. He's like, and I wanted to tell you, my life has gone on a couple different weird journeys, he said, but I decided to go back to school to get my degree in psychology. And now Blaine is like 31 years old.
Hmm.
And we're standing in Wawa and he gives me a hug. And he's like, I got a little choked up telling the story, but he's like, your belief in me made all the difference in the world at that time in my life. He said, I would not be where I am today without your belief in me and your pouring into me at that time in my life. And I said, you had that in you the whole time, that conversation that we had might have unlocked something, but it was in there the whole time, buddy. Like
Hmm.
I gave him that, but he's going to graduate with a degree in psychology and he wants to eventually help young men, which I thought was this is so freaking cool. So I walk out of Wawa and he goes, I'm gonna give you a call next week, exchange numbers. I'm gonna give you a call next week. I want to take you out to lunch and just, express my gratitude for you, for that experience. So anyway, I'm walking out of Wawa and I'm thinking, what a cool reframe for me to go through, right? I'm in the gym. I switch up my schedule. I'm in the gym in the morning. I leave the gym and I'm so pissed off that, God damn it, I lifted, like, wait, I should have done the stretching. I should have been in the sauna beforehand, just get my muscles ready to go. I'm not 22 years old anymore. So
Mhm.
I was mad at myself in that moment. And because that happened, I changed my route that morning and I wound up in a space where this kid who I haven't talked to in a long period of time shares this piece that he was thinking about me the day before. So it was so serendipitous to be there. And I was like, how many times in our life do we do that? Do we get into a space where we feel sorry for ourselves, woe is me, but whatever just happened it happened because it was supposed to happen, right? So
Mhm.
I could go back and beat myself up for not stretching, but I find myself in a spot where my back is bothering me, get a bag of ice, and I run into this kid. And by that conversation, I'm going to have him on as a guest on the podcast.
Mhm.
Now I'm going to be like, what can I do to make sure that your path could potentially be a little bit more cleared for you moving forward as you get a degree
Mhm.
in psychology within the next couple months.
Mhm.
So I don't know how I even got onto that journey right there, but it was just a moment for me that I felt like overwhelmed by the mindset shift that I had in like a 5 minute period of time. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm so grateful that I went on, that I hurt my back yesterday morning, as
Yep.
crazy as that sounds, because that connection now I truly believe will lead to other possible ripple effects in the future.
Yeah. That's it's such like it's so just a weight lifting off of you in a sense on my end, possibly on your end, but of why am I going through this pain? But it's so much greater on the other side, even though it's something silly in a sense. Oh, I hurt my back at the gym, It's this pain we don't want to deal with this un like why is this happening to me? This random discomfort, but on the other side, it's so much greater. And that's not always how it shows up and correlates, but when we do see it, when it does come about, like that conversation for you, I'm sure was so much greater than that small inconvenience at the gym.
A hundred
You
percent.
know, that's what it comes down to. So, Dennis, thank you for sharing that story. That was a great way just to leave off, and I know that will be something that when I listen back to this, I get another breath of fresh air being able to listen back to that again. So, I won't take up any more of your time. This was awesome on my end. So,
Oh, same, man. This is great.
thank you for being here. All right.
Absolutely, brother.
All
Absolutely.
right.
It was great running into you at the event, and I appreciate the time you spent with me today.
All right. Beautiful. All right. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, guys.